Fox News foreign policy analyst Karen Skinner. She is the director of the Institute for Politics and Strategy at Carnegie Mellon University and Hoover Institution Research Fellow. Karen, good to see you on the program once again. Welcome back.
Thank you.
You just heard Lindsey Graham. Do you agree with that view on this?
Absolutely. Preemption is becoming something that we have to think about a lot more carefully and daily, but it's not where we want to be. But the fact of the matter is that the nuclear blackmail that the North Korean regime is trying to impose on the United States is something we cannot ignore. And that's why the recent air drills that are taking place by the United States and the government in Seoul are so important because they show the quality and the quantity of U.S. military prowess in the air. And, there's just been a quantitative and qualitative, difference in what we've been doing in these military drills in 2017 due to the provocations that the North Koreans continually have put forth through their various missile tests.
Now, to follow up, Karen, on Maria's point, you said you agree with what Senator Lindsey Graham had to say, and what he said is that we're getting close to a military conflict. So I guess my question would be is what triggers that conflict? Is there some sort of an event you can foresee that would be first shot fired in all this?
I think military planners are spending day and night on that very question, and I'm not sure that we know exactly when they will decide to kind of so-called pull the trigger and do something preemptively. But the military drills that we're undertaking, I do think, affect the calculus of the North Korean regime, and more importantly, perhaps, they are helping to make clear to the Chinese that this, menace of the North Korean regime is such a provocation for their own border. And I think that will begin to help really perhaps make the North Koreans at some point look at their options differently, because the Chinese now have to be working overtime, Karen, given what could possibly happen in, before year's end even.
Yeah. Chiron, Estega McDowell, what about additional pressure we can put on China and Russia in terms of sanctions? The sanctions out of the UN, we know that Singapore and Thailand have been very slow to enforce these sanctions. And with what came out of the United Nations, we merely capped oil imports or oil exports to North Korea and labor contracts. We did not cut off those cash lifelines to North Korea completely. What else can we do?
Sanctions have an uneven record in recent decades across the board in terms, and one of the reasons is that often, even when you get a UN Security Council resolution imposing sanctions, and we've had, some very powerful ones just this year, it's hard to get all parties to comply. And so I think it's important to kind of make sure that compliance happens insofar as we can do that. But really, the Chinese and the Russians have not taken leadership on this issue. And what's happening is that the United States is emerging in Northeast Asia as the, the great power that's the responsible actor, that's organizing interest, that's building, closer bilateral relations, U.S., South Korea, U.S., Japan. And we don't see that happening with the Russians and the Chinese. And I think that will begin to affect them as they, look like lesser actors in trying to bring peace and stability to the region. That's the United States right now.
Right.
Ms. Skinner, Israel has a missile defense system known as Iron Dome, which has proven very effective in the Middle East. Do the U.S., South Korea, and Japan have the kind of missile defense capabilities that could prevent an outright catastrophe and give our side a strategic advantage in this confrontation?
We do, and that's why, the North Koreans and the Chinese have been concerned about the THAAD system that the U.S. has been installing this year in South Korea, and have the Chinese wanted a slowdown on that commitment. There's been such advances in missile defense both for South Korea and Japan in recent decades. And that will play a role, but you have to have layered defense. It can't just be one missile defense system. You've got to have them for various phases, boost phase and other phases of a weapon that's been launched. And you've got to back that up with all other types of military power. We just don't want to have to get to that phase of U.S. North Korean relations, but we're getting there. But we're much more fortified than we've been in decades, not just in terms of military power, but also resolve.
Kyron, thanks so much for your insights this morning.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time very much. Kyron Skinner there.